The Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch, Shin Tzadik Chet, 398, speaks about the law of mornings, the way that the Almighty created the world. The Torah tells us that there is a circle of life, and because there is a circle of life, we have to handle situations, unfortunately, of losing loved one. According to our Torah, there are 7 immediate families that we are obligated to mourn over, which are father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, and for sure a husband or wife. With that in mind, the code tells us in Shin Tzadik Chet that the law of mourning has a different chumrot, the different obligations when it's come to the first day, the first 7 days, the Shiva, the 30 days, and the year, the 11 months, the year. According to the code, the first day, it's a biblical, then it's a question, Rambam, Ravad, and others, when it's come to the rest of the 7 days. But everyone agree that for sure it's an obligation for the whole week, for the 7 days mourning period. The difference is in the sense of rabbinic decree for the 30 days, the 7 days, etc. In very general statement, for father and mother, there is an extra obligation. It's in our responsibility that applies to the entire 12 months. In conclusion, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, tells us, again in Shin Tzadik Chet, that the obligation of these, specifically the 30 days and the 12 months for parents, it's rabbinic. So part of our discussion today, we are today in Tractate Irouvin, page Memvav 46. We're going to discuss these halachot. We begin on 45b, 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Mar meaning master, the one of the sages said, Beyom Tov harei hen keraglei kol adam. We discussed yesterday the idea of rain, the rainfall, the water at the midst of festival. So they said if they have those rain dwell during the festival, kanush vita, they partake during the twilight time. So we hold it the same is like the feet of the people. So the Gemara said, Ve'amai liknei shvita be'okianus. May we say that the water should have acquired residence in the oceanus, in the large ocean. So it means that we hold that the oceanus, the ocean, has a process. First, it's water, and then that water changed to later a cloud, and from that point you have a rain. The Torah tells us at the very beginning of book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, Ve'ed ya'aleh min haaretz ve'ishka et kol pnei adama. Ed is like a dim, it's like the smoke coming from the ground, and spread the water. So if you have an ocean, and you take the idea of ocean, turn to these clouds and bring in the water, so in that sense, that water, for our discussion, we talk about the Eiruvin and something that come out of the Shabbat limits, etc. So if it comes during the Yom Tov from outside of the Shabbat limits, so it's outside of their domain, and therefore you may consider that as part of our previous discussion, which is the area of the 4 cubits only. Leima de lo ki Rabbi Eliezer, we may hold, unlike Rabbi Eliezer, the ik Rabbi Eliezer amar kol haolam mimei okeanus hu shoteh. If you go by the Rabbi Eliezer hold that the entire world drinks from the water of the ocean, which means the evaporation of the ocean water, it's the key source of the rain. Rabbi Yoshua disagreed with that. But remember the line we said from Bereshit, from the Genesis, the Torah tells us that it was a process, that this smoke come from the ground and spread the water. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Hacha be'avim shenitקשרו me'erev Yom Tov askina. We are speaking about a cloud. You see here a lot of time, you look up, you see clouds, and you notice that the clouds is getting serious and stronger, and then all of a sudden we have a rain. So here we speak about rain that came out of a cloud that already set up in advance. So therefore it's not that they kanu shvita, that they dwell permanently in the, for our discussion, in the ocean, but it's not considering out of the domain, the limits. So the Gemara asks, "V'dilma hanach azlei v'hanach acharin aninu." May you say that these clouds, that it's already been formed in the eve of the festival, and they meanwhile move and went away, and the new one, the cloud you see now, it's not the cloud that you see a rain fell, it's a old one, it's basically new one that just came in. So the Gemara answered and said, the itlei simana begavayu. You look at them, they have a special way of looking. Some people have this hobby to go and take pictures of the clouds. So if you take a picture of the cloud, if you look carefully, there is a certain appearance of the cloud. You look at them, there is a certain way they look. So therefore, if those clouds have a certain appearance, you recognize that when it's come out. So if you have that recognition, you know that these are the clouds that were there in the day before. Veibai tema, it's another explanation. Have safek de divrehem. This is a dilemma, it's predicament, it's the quandary by the rabbis, because this prohibition of carrying, it's only rabbinic, the limitations, and therefore even those who hold that the whole idea of Shabbat limitations is biblical, which is not everyone, apply only when a person walk on Shabbat outside of the Shabbat domain, or if he carries something outside of the Shabbat domain. But if it's different, for example, if you have those rains, just for the understanding, it's moving by themselves, or for our discussion, if you have a person that live for a reason. You remember what we said yesterday and day before yesterday? Someone needs to save lives, someone needs to go for certain purposes. So it's not that he violated the biblical prohibition of going out of his 4 cubits, and therefore it's different. So it's a safek de Rabbanan, it's a question, a quandary by rabbinic measurement. So there are said that it's a difference between a person himself or something that it's part of person's property. So that's, again, it's all rabbinic. The Vilna Gaon said something very fascinating. He says, if you look the way, the analytic way that this discussion, this sugya is all about, you realize very strongly that our previous discussion over Tchumin, the Shabbat limit, it's rabbinic and not biblical. As you remember, we have a long discussion if that's a biblical or rabbinic. So Vilna Gaon said that this is this discussion. He says v'safek d'divreim le'akel. Since we said at the very end that this respect is rabbinic law, and the principle is that with regard with an uncertainty concerning the rabbinical law, one may follow the lenient understanding. So again, so we said that this cloud was in advance. Veliknei shvita be'avim. Let the water acquire residence in the clouds, which means where it was when the festival began, and its limit should be measured from there. So since the Braita taught that the water is like feet of all the people, so you said tifshot mina, you understand from that again, if a person gained those water, especially, you know, there are places in the world that they're in the desperation for water. So if a person collected that water, you can say that he acquired them, it's his, in our discussion legally. Tifshot mina de'en tchumim lemala ma'asara, that the limit, it's not more than the 10 handbreadth, and therefore it's not getting the point of kanush vita, dwelling permanently in those clouds. The iesh tchunim, if you tell me that it's more than 10 handbreadth, liknei shvita be'avim, that this water should be a permanent in those cloud, and one who filled it up within his domain cannot carry them outside of his domain because they have independent domain. So he said, why we don't use this discussion, this conclusion here? So the answer, they said, le'olam ei malach yesh tchumin, that you come back and say that there are limits that exceeded more than 10 handbreadth. Umaya be'eva nivla blai, which means the water, remember, you see it's a process. What do we say? We said the first is the ocean, then you have the cloud, and then we have the rain. So the stage we're speaking about rain, it's within the clouds. It's not out. So since it's not out, we are now resolved that it's not kanush vita, so it's not acquire residence there. 46. Kol sheken dehavu lo nolad ve'asiri. So now we said that the sage is forbidden to carry on Shabbat and Yom Tov anything that it wasn't prepared in advance, and what we call it set aside like muktzeh, which means you isolate, you separate, and you have in your mind, as the Gemara said in Beya, the beginning, you set it up in advance. So he said, even something that was born is some type of set aside, some type of muktzeh, because it wasn't set up in advance. So therefore, if those water that was in the rain wasn't existed, so therefore now it's forbidden to carry. So, Ela Maya Be'avim Meidad Naide. The water within the clouds are constantly moving. So it means that you don't consider that as part of cooperation with the cloud. So they said, Hashta de'atit le'achei. Now, what's the conclusion? What's the essence of our discussion? That something that it's not staying permanently, it's not making as acquirement of residence. Okianus namelo likshulach. Now you don't ask even in regards to the ocean. Why? Because what happened in the ocean? It's a constant change. It's constant moving. Okay? So, lo kanu shvita. It's not acquire residence. V'tanya ne'arot ha'moshchim u'ma'ayanot ha'novim haren ke'raglei kol adam. So we learn also that if you have flowing rivers and steaming springs, so it's considered the same as a regular feet of people, which means because they are constantly moving from the beginning of the festival, so they are not considering as kanu shvita, as acquire residence, and only if they stop even at the middle of the festival, then they hold these rules that apply to water that are permanent staining. That's Rashi's point of view. Tosfot have some issue here in Ritva, because they said in order to acquire ownership you need to follow the whole process, which is you need to draw the water and you need to acquire them, and those water were not staying there at that state at that time. So again the Tosfot and Ritva have some issues. We do not have time for that. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Halacha ke Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So if you remember yesterday we have a long discussion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So he hold in very short that if someone fall asleep while traveling, so he acquire resident in that domain, and therefore he has 2,000 cubit to any direction he wish. We have no discussion yet, something that it's ownerless. So he said, Amar le Rabbi Zeira le Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, beferush mi'alach, or michlal hashmi'alach? Amar le beferush mi'ali. He asked him a question. He says, what exactly you heard from this master, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi? Did you heard him saying clearly that the halacha follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in regard to a person who fall asleep, or you derive understanding from what he said? You see, it's a very sensitive point, because you go around the table, you tell someone next to you something, and he comes back to you very different. So they ask him, they want to understand what exactly you hear. Did you heard him saying that, or you interpreted what he said and you have your own mindset? So he said, no, I heard it in such unequivocal way. It wasn't ambiguous. It was clear that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that that's the halacha. So now they ask, my klala, what type of principle Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi can say in regard to that Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi derived that that's the halacha, follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? So the Gemara said, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, halacha kedivrei hameikel be'Eiruv. And that's very important. When it's come to Eiruvin, the Shabbat limits and putting the Eruv, so we go lenient. So since we hold that all these Shabbat limitations, the Shabbat festival limitations, it's part of the law of Eiruvin, so therefore, since we say that in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is the one who is lenient, since he allow a person to go in 2,000 cubit, so therefore you derive, so since we go leniency in Eiruvin, so halacha Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, halacha according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So the Gemara asks, V'tartei lamali, why Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi needs to tell us two halachot? One, that we go lenient with a person, that the one who is lenient in the law of Eiruvin. So you don't need to say clearly that that's the halacha according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in that in that conjunction, and then you derive that. So you don't need to say it in a sense twice. So he said, we need both. Why? When you follow someone, for example, in this case of Yochanan ben Nuri, if you remember this name of great rabbi, we mentioned many times. Remember when we talk about Kitniot, to mention his name? It's a very popular in the Talmud. So if you drive something according to him, you may say that that's applied regardless if it's a lenient or stringency. For example, if something that have an ownerless of a property, so we said that it's not acquire resident in a place that they are dwell. So, and Rabbi Yochanan said no, that they have a separate domain for them and you cannot pull it out. So here Rabbi Shimon Levi wants to tell us no, that halacha follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri only in the area that he is lenient, which is if a person fall asleep within the domain of 2,000 cubits. But if you come to other issues such as ownerless properties, you don't go by him, you go lenient and you give them the entire domain of a person who acquired them. So Rashi explained to us that there is a rationale behind that. Rashi said that a person can dwell a resident not only when he's asleep, it's also when he's awake. Now, so therefore he acquired residence regardless to his physical circumstances. But he said something that it's ownerless, you cannot say that that's acquired residence since it's ownerless. So then they said, V'leima, maybe Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Alacha k'divrei HaMakel be'eruv, Alacha k'Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lamali. So if he said that they follow the rules when it's come to the Eruv, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, in regard to a person who fall asleep, so why you need to say again the whole idea of Alacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, even if a person fall asleep? So the Gemara explained and it said, Itzrich. You need to say it clearly. We said it many times that when is a disputation between individual and many, or vice versa, so we usually Yachid ve'Rabim alacha ke'Rabim, we go by the majority. But there are rare circumstances that we go by one individual. Here you see that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is one individual opposing what everyone else, all the sages said. So may you say that if that's the case, you don't go lenient when it's come to Eru, and you go by the majority that they are more stringent. And that makes sense because when it's come to these type of things, you may go by the majority like usually. So therefore Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi needs to tell us clearly that Halacha is following Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in this Mishnah, even his point of view, it's individual point of view and not the majority. אמר לי רב על אביי מיכדי עירובין דרבנן, מה ליחיד במקום יחיד, מה ליחיד במקום רבים. He said, now, since the law of Eiruvin are rabbinic law, so what's the reason that you differentiate between this agreement of single authority with a single authority and a disagreement with a single authority with a several authority? So why you need to say clearly that you follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? אמר לרב פאפא לרבנן ובדרבנן לא שן אלא בין יחיד במקום יחיד בין יחיד במקום רבים. You tell me that in rabbinics there's no difference? He said, Vatnan, we learn in the Mishnah in the Tractate Nida, page 7b, Rabbi Lazar אומר, כל איש השבוע לה שלוש שנות היה שעתה. So, in a very general term, we are now digressing, but we'll come back to our discussion, but in order to prove the point. So they said, if there is a situation that women have a blood coming out of her, so even it's not, in a sense, coming out physically of her body, but when she is basically get the first feeling, the first, she should, according to the Torah, she should not be concerned that it's coming out of her at that point. But the sages put in a special fence, a special border, and they said, since there are issues of touching consecrated items, so therefore they put a boundary, and they said that you can go even retroactively 24 hours earlier than that moment, and therefore it may delay within her tube until it comes out of her body. So therefore anything that she touched in between, according to the Gemara we studied, if you remember last year in Nida, by rabbinic law it becomes impure, which is basically retroactive point. Again, for the one who just walked in, just some point of explanations. We explain that there is a process when it's come to Nida. There is a point that she really sees it, and there is a point that it's in a process. So biblically speaking, you only go by the way that she is really see it. The rabbis came and put the boundaries, since it issues, particularly of touching consecrated items, that you have to go 24 hours earlier than the time it appears, and therefore what she touched became ritually impure. So they said Vetanya Maaseh. So to make it very clear, this disputation between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages divided between women that reach the age and the point that she's not seeing it as often as in the youth years. So in those years there is a concept that it's called Shalosh Honot. In other words, 30 days it's considering an Ona, a certain period. And if it's a 3 times 30 days, it's like, in a sense, Tlat Zimne Have Chazaka, 3 times it's like something permanent. And therefore, she's in under that category. So Rabbi Eliezer said that regardless to her age, you always go lenience, and the sages said no, that's apply only to elderly women, in a sense that it's she doesn't see it as often as the one that young. So if she in that age and she's not seeing it so often, like every 30 days, so the sages said you don't concern that she's retroactively become ritually impure. So the story here of Vetanya Maaseh, that it was a unique story, an exceptional story of a woman that was young in age, yet she passed the 3 onot, the 3 periods, which is 90 days, and she brought this question before Rabbi. V'asa Rabbi Rabbi Elazar, which means that he followed halacha according to Rabbi Elazar, and he purified whatever she touched between those periods, me'et le'et, retroactively. La'achar shenizkar amar, and then he realized that it wasn't right. He says, Kedai Rabbi Elazar lismoch alav bishat hatzchak. It was a period of time that it was a famine, it wasn't much food, so therefore he says by force of circumstance Rabbi Elazar is wanted to rely upon in those extreme circumstances. And Rav Papa elaborated on that, and he said, "Mai la'achar shenizkar." What exactly he made a mistake? If you tell me that he meant that the halacha is not follow Rabbi Elazar but only sages, that they hold that the woman that was retroactively become ritually impure applied to young that she didn't see 3 times, 3 or not, which is 90 days. So how come he go by Rabbi Elazar? So it's clearly that they said that we don't follow Rabbi Elazar even in that extreme circumstance. So even he is now purified, those consecrated item, he needs to return, come back and say that it's wrong and they are ritually impure. But you must say that halacha did not follow neither one, not Rabbi Elazar, not the sages. And la'achar shenizkar, the meaning of the brighter is that when Rabbi realized that he didn't rule properly, the Lav Yachid Paligalei, that it's not only one individual that disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, Ela Rabim Pligalei, which means that everyone disagree with him. Amar Kedai Rabbi Elazar is more B'Shat Chag, because it's already made the ruling. So it means that even something that is rabbinic law, such as the ritual impurity of women in her menstruation from this period to the next period, which is between the 30, which is the 90s, we follow the majority against individual when it's not an extreme circumstance. So this basically, it's a proof to what we said earlier, that Rava said that we follow sages in a sense when it's lenient, even when it's one individual against majority. Another proof, and now again, we digress into another point in order to prove the key point here. So is the subject we discussed earlier before the shiur, in just an introduction, from Shulchan Aruch Shin Tzadik Chet. אמר רב משרשיה לרבה ואמר לרב נחמן בר יצחק לרבה ובדרבנן לא נשנה בין יחיד במקום יחיד לבין יחיד במקום רבים. So he said there is no difference with regard to rabbinic laws between a disagreement of a single authority with a single authority and disagreement with a single authority to majority. Here is an example. והתניא, we learn in the Braita, שמועה קרובה נוהגת שבעה. If someone here, unfortunately for losing his immediate, one of the 7 immediate family, so the mourner period applied for 7 days, which is not to shave, not to take a laundry, not to take a bath, etc. from that day, which means the day that he heard about it, Ushloshim, but the idea of 30 days not to have a haircut, etc., it's from the day that he heard. Rechoka, אינה נוהגת אלא יום אחד. But something that is from distance apply only one day. What does that mean? ואיזו היא קרובה ואיזו רחוקה. What's the difference between something that is close by and something that's far away? So he said, בתוך 30 שמועה קרובה. So if it's happened during the 30 days period, it's considering a close by. So in a regular case scenario, Mr. A heard about losing his, let's say, brother. So that's considering doing the 30 days krova, this close by. But if it's past 30 days, like it happens here, you hear the family inform over the loss of the loved one in Afghanistan and Iraq 2 months after the passing. They recognize the body and everything, and then they inform the family. So that's considering a distance news. So he said, if it's past 30 days, Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that it's considering Shmu'a Rechoka. It's information that come out past the 30 days, it's from distance. והחכמים אומרים, the sages said, אחת שמועה קרובה ואחת שמועה רחוקה נוהגת 7 ו-30. They said, in case of proximate report and something that is a distance report, we go by the grieving period, which is a practice for 7 days mourning period and 30 days mourning period regardless. And they said, ואמר רבא בר חנא אמר רבי יוחנן, כל מקום שאתה מוצא יחיד מקל ורבים מחמירים, לאחר כדברי המחמירים המרובים. חוץ מזו, anytime you find one individual that's lenient and everyone else is stringent, we go by the majority that is stringent. Exceptionally, except an example for something that it's from distance information, שאף על פי שרבי עקיבא מקל, that even Rabbi Akiva is lenient and he said, well, come on, it passed 30 days, you need to mourn only for 1 day, והחכמים מחמירים, and the sages said that you need to have all period of time. So let's trace a scenario. Someone who heard about the loss of loved one in Afghanistan 3.5 months after the passing. So by Rabbi Akiva, the mourning period is 1 day. The sages said, oh, the moment you heard about it, now you need to observe 7 days, 30 days, etc., etc., etc. So he said, here is an exception, halacha ki Rabbi Akiva, we go by Rabbi Akiva, v'savala k'Shmuel, and he followed the Shmuel that said, halacha k'divrei hamekel be'avel. When it's come to law of mourning, you go lenient, even what it's one individual against everyone else. And Tosfot said, elaborate on that. Again, I wish to have more time to elaborate on this Tosfot. 46b, ורב פאפא אמר איץ צריך, סגל אתה חמינה אני מילי בעירובי חצרות ובעירובי תחומים לא צריכה. So the Bach and Rashi have two girsahot. One says Rav Papa, one says Rav Papa. He said, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi need to teach us that we follow halacha according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Even we said, in a sense, we back to our subject with leniency in the Eruv. So you may say that that's applied only to Eruvei Chatzerot, that the courtyard that they're sharing, but in Eruvei Tchumin, in the Shabbat limit, you don't go lenient. So then Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi need to tell us that halacha follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that halacha follow him only in the Tchumin, on Shabbat limits, but not in the courtyard. How do you know that there is a difference between Chatzerot and Tchumim? That none. We're going to study Mitzvah Shem on page 81b. So, אמר רבי יהודה, מדבר מורים, בעירובי תחומים, אבל חצרות מעמיד אדם בשלב שלא יודע, שזכין לאדם שלא בפניו יכולים לאדם בפניו. Okay. If you have money that belongs to someone else, just for the sake of understanding. Let's say, if I am a stockbroker, and I'm in charge for your account, one of you guys' account, and you have $1 million in that account, and it's spread over different stocks. And usually, the manner of our interaction is you call me, and you give me instructions, sell this, buy this, okay? And I follow your instructions. Now, one day, I decided that is something that is very good for you, and I took $50,000 from your account, and I purchased for you certain stocks. Now, if you lose, you can go after me and say, how dare you did it without my consent? I want my money back, and you're right. Now, if you gain money out of that, so the halacha said that it's yours. Why it's yours? Even I did it without your consent, and I need to pay you out of my pocket if you lost that stock. But if the opposite way, I can make it even without your consent if you gain. So here we're not talking about money, we talk about Eiruvin. I just brought it as an example. If someone asks someone else to do something on his behalf, so he doesn't need to be physically there. So if, for example, there are development, and they have many people who have townhouses in development, and someone who's taking care of all the Eiruvin of the Chatzerot of different courtyard, so he does that for everyone else, okay? So regardless if people fully aware and consent of that, he can do it. If it's come to zchut, if it's come to marry, you can do it without the person consent. But if it's something that you may have a potential to lose something, so you need to have the consent of a person to agree of that action. So when it's come to courtyard, chatzerot, it's not an issue of potential losing something. Why? Because it's just that development. But Eruvei Chatzerot, now you tell me, what is the chance for losing something in Eruvei Chatzerot? The answer is, since you make that limit, you force the other fellow to go 2,000 cubits just to that direction. and if he wished to go the opposite direction, you basically limited here. He lost an opportunity. Remember we discussed, for example, greeting a sage. So if the sage comes from the east and you make the Eruv in the west, he lost that opportunity to go there and see his Rebbe. Just an example, okay? So therefore, you can go positive, meaning something that is no potential for losing anything when it's come to courtyard Eruv. But when it's come to Shabbat limits, you cannot do it without the person consent. What do you derive from that? The whole concept of Eruvei Tchumin, it's more stringent than Eruvei Chatzerot. So, again, since they have a potential of losing, you need to have the person's fully consent. Rav Ashi Amar Itztrich, Sagad Adach Aminan Emilu B'Shiur Eiruvin, Avar B'Tchiat Eruvin, Eima Lo. Sometimes we explain that the person make a Eruv not for 1 week, but for several weeks. So if it's left over Eruv, so then it's a question, when it's a courtyard, can a person use from the previous week or 2 weeks ago for this week? But if you talk about the others, so someone who fall asleep while he's in a journey, is that considering the same category as Chatzerot? No, because he didn't make retroactively the Eruv before that, so we don't know that Allah Hafal Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi needs to tell us clearly that we are lenient and we follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri. So how do you know that that we are more lenient between the leftover of the Eruv to something that was a original plan? So that now we have a Mishnah, Mitzvah we're going to study, page 80b. The Mishnah have a discussion in regards to a bread that we need to prepare in advance for the Eruv Chatzerot, for the courtyard. Amar Rabbi Yossi, B'mei Dvarim Amurim. What's the measurement we need to have there? So again, I give you just the vignette of that, the abbreviation. If we have a development of 17 people, imagine those people who live, for example, in Riva, or living in the other, like Florida. So there's a lot of development. So the basic rules is, if you have 17 members of that development, you put even a small, tiny amount of food there for each and every one, and that's enough. But if there are 18, you need to have 18 pieces, which is equivalent, Rashi said, to 2 meals. Now we said, Bitchilat Eruv. All of that apply, that you need to have a certain measurement when you're planning in advance the Eruv. Aval b'shiurei Eruv. However, if it's applied to what left over in the Eruv, he says, afilu kolshu, even a minimal amount, it suffices. ולא אמרו לערב חצרות אלא כדי לשכח תורת עירובין מן התינוקות. The reason that the sages require to have this type of עירובי חצרות in the courtyard, that the children will not forget it, which means that we may not be aware of the arrangement that made with regard to those alleyways. So because we see that the sages is more lenient in the leftover of the Eruv, so you may think that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi go by the one who's lenient only in the leftover of the Eruv, and in order to avoid this misunderstanding, he said clearly that we follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri in the Mishnah, even that it's before the process of Eruv. Rabbi Yaakov. Now we just want to bring the final word in regard to halachot, and since we talk about the final halacha, we said Rabbi Yaakov Rabbi Ziri Kamru halacha Rabbi Akiva mechavero. Rabbi Akiva turned to be, which remind all of you that you have a great potential to be the highest sage, because he started in a way, very old age, but because he became such a giant scholar, so they said that even someone else disagree with him, we follow Rabbi Akiva. And Rashi said it's not only in the Eiruvin, it's any place in the Shas, any place in the Talmud. If it's one individual disagree with Rabbi Akiva, we go by Rabbi Akiva, always. Rabbi Yossi mechaverav, and again Rabbi Yossi, when he dispute from others, we follow him. Rabbi mechavero, and the same apply to Rabbi when someone disagree with him. So the Gemara asks, Lemay ilcheta, what is this rules? Rabbi Yossi amar halacha, which means we go by Rabbi Akiva against one individual. Rabbi Yossi even many, and Rabbi one individual, which means that you can make a practical halacha from them. Rabbi Yecheba Rabbi amar matin, which means if someone come and ask how should follow halacha in God's will, halachot you do that, but we don't say to public that they should follow in regardless. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina amar nir'in, which means Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Zereka, they say that it appears that way, but we don't follow. Even one individual who come and ask, we just say that we follow them, but it's not a final word. Must say that the Tosfot here elaborate on that a lot. We do not have enough time for that. Kalashon hazeh amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi amar Rabbi Yochanan Rab Meir ורבי יהודה הלכה כרבי יהודה. רבי יהודה ורבי יוסי הלכה כרבי יוסי, ואין צריך לומר רב מאיר ורבי יוסי הלכה כרבי יוסי, השתא במקום רבי יהודה ליתא במקום רבי יוסי מבעיה. So he said basically that in a case of dispute between Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, halacha follow Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi halacha follow Rabbi Yossi. And it's for sure we don't need to say that it's if it's a dispute between Rab Meir and Rabbi Yossi, halacha according to Rabbi Yossi. So now in dispute with Rabbi Yehuda, so the opinion of Rabbi Meir is not accepted. So you need to say that in the dispute of Rabbi Yossi, it's for sure. You don't need to say it. For sure we don't follow halacha according to him. So again, Tosfot here elaborates on that. He said that one individual disagree and follow Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, and Rabbi Yossi derived from that. He said, Rabbi Yossi afani lomed Rabbi Yossi ורבי שמעון הלכה כרבי יוסי. דבר רבי אבא אמר רבי יוחנן רבי יהודה ורבי שמעון הלכה כרבי יהודה. So if it's a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Shimon, you go by Rabbi Yehuda. Ashta במקום רבי יהודה ליתא במקום רבי יוסי מבעיה. Again, the same idea that if you don't go halacha by Rabbi Shimon, so it's if it's Rabbi Yossi for sure, you don't even have a question. So the Gemara said, "Ibayalu Rabbi Meir Rabbi Shimon Mai." So finally, if it's Rabbi Meir Rabbi Shimon, what we go? It said Teiko, which means we don't solve. So in conclusion, according to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the principle is as follows: we go by Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. If it's we go by Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Yehuda, and for sure it's against Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir, which means that we are not clear what's the halacha when it's disputation between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rav Misharashia, with all these principles, Misharashia said, "Litnu le'ane klali." So these principles of halachic decision making are not to be relied upon. Menala le Rav Misharashia, how do you know that? Ila ma me'alet nan Rabbi Shimon, אומר למה הדבר דומה לשלוש חצרות הפתוחות לאזור פתוחות לרשות הרבים. If it's equivalent to a 3 courtyard that open to each other, and it's open to public domain. Remember the picture I showed you yesterday from the Meorot, remember that? So he said, if it's that situation, if the two, the middle, did together with the one, if the two outer courtyard establish an area with the middle one, the resident of the middle one are permitted to carry to the two outer one, and they are permitted to carry in. It says, but the residents of the two outer courtyards are prohibited to carry from one another as did not establish an Eruv with one another. ואמר רבי חמא בר גוריה, אמר רב, הלכה כרבי שמעון. So he said, follow halacha here, Rabbi Shimon. So you see here it's clear. He said, Uman Paligalei, and one was disagree with him, Rabbi Yehuda. Va'amar Rabbi Shimon halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda said the opposite. You have to conclude that the Mishnah, that these principles should not be relied upon. So they said, Umay Kushya. And what's the question you have that you follow Rabbi Shimon? Dilma heicha de yitmar yitmar. You may say that whatever he stated explicitly to be contrary, it's stated. Heicha de lo yitmar lo yitmar. When it's not stated clearly, it is not stated, and the principle apply. Ela meha. You have to follow as follows. עיר של יחיד ונעשית של רבים, מערבים את כולה. Sometimes you have a city that starts as a individual, in a sense that it's like a private domain, that you don't have the amount of people that consider that as a city. We said in general that it has to be 60 ribor, 60,000 ribor. So that needs to have the domain of public. ונעשית של רבים, and all of a sudden it turned to be a very large city. You see it in our city, by the way. I remember 11 years ago, it was the end of the world city. And now you see with huge developments that it turned to be a very big, heavy traffic city. So if that's changed, me'arvin et kula. You have to make the Eruv that belong to many people, and one is stable Eruv of a courtyard for all of it. He says, של רבים ונעשית של יחיד, אין מערבים את כולה. But if it was the opposite, that it was belonged to many people, and now it falls into the possession of a single individual, so he said, you don't need to do that. אין מערבים את כולה. You cannot make it for the entire city. אלא אם כן עושה חוצה לה. Only if he established an Eruv for all, and he excluded from the Eruv and the area size of the town. He says, כעיר חדשה שביהודה, like the town of חדשה in Judah, which is, שיש בה 50 דיורים דברי רבי יהודה, that contains 50 residents. That's the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon אומר, Rabbi Shimon disagree, and he said, we just turned to page 47a, שלוש חצרות של שני בתים. He said the excluded area, it doesn't need to be so large, and the 3 courtyards, each containing 2 houses, are sufficient for this purpose. אמר רב חמא בר גוריה, אמר רב הלכה כרבי שמעון. So now you see הלכה כרבי שמעון, מהי פלג לרבי יהודה? לא אמרת רבי יהודה ורבי שמעון הלכה כרבי יהודה? So it's the opposite. It says מהי קושיא? דילמה, הכנה מהיכא דאיתמר איתמר, היכא לא איתמר. So you have to say that whoever was stated, and the principle that the halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda applies. The first halacha is the Shulchan Aruch or Yoredea 402, and it's also in Shin Tzadik Chet, that said, Shmua Krov Archoka, one who received a approximate report of the death of a close relative, practices both the mourning customs observed for 7 days and those observed for 30 days. One who receives a distant report, remember we talked about Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. So it happened that the family reported much later, which is called distant report, practice mourning customs for only 1 day, with part of a day considered to be the entire day. Some authority rules that although the law governing the 7 days mourning period are not practiced in the case of distant report concerning a father or a mother, the law of mourning are observed. So again, they differentiate between father and mother and others in the list of the 7 relatives. Another halacha, we dealt with the Hilchot Nida. This is Rambam, Sefer Tahara, Hilchot Metameh Mishkav Moshav, chapter 4. A woman approaching a period who passes 3 expected cycle without experiencing bleeding and sees blood with regard to a ritually impure, only for the time that she examines herself and experiences the menstrual flow. However, the law concerning a young woman is different. She is retroactively ritually impure for up to 74 hours. That's the opinion of the sages. The last halacha I would like to share with you, it's we talked today a little bit about situations that we're not so sure when it's come to a mourning period, and such as a circumstance of a different time of burial and the distance of information, etc. I keep saying it many times that in this type of situation you have to ask a prominent posek, someone who's well-established posek. In each circumstance sometimes is very different than the others. And the last one is the Gesher HaChaim from Rabbi Tukochinsky tells us that is a machloket, is different opinion by the time of burial. So in general we said that when we bury, we go by the first year of Yortzeit, the first year of mourning, by the time of the passing. But there are those opinions that say that if it was a distance more than a day, if it was delayed, and the time of passing and time of burial exceeded in those circumstances 3 days, the first year we should go by the time of burial. The Gesher HaChaim, the Bridge of Life of Rabbi Tukochinsky, doesn't hold that, and he followed those ideas that you always have to follow by the day of burial, by the day of passing. But again, there are some opinions, again I'm not going there now, but there are some opinions that says that you have to differentiate between the first year and the rest of the years if the burial took place a longer period than it should be, which is immediate, and we always try to bury as quick as possible.